But one thing that I talk to a lot of my students and even training partners about is ways to improve and do it in a cost efficient way. So if you don't mind, I just want to throw a couple of those things out now, because I don't think people realize how cost efficient you could be.
Welcome to Trigger Discipline, firearms knowledge for the novice, curious, and the experienced. We're your hosts, Nick and Pete. We believe that firearms don't have to be dangerous and terrifying. Firearms are not only a vital tool in our world, but they can be safely enjoyed with just the littlest of effort by the user. Welcome to another episode of Trigger Discipline. I'm your host, Nick. We preach it to everyone we meet when talking about firearms. Training, training, training. We preach that no matter what type of firearm or even weapon you carry, it doesn't matter without the proper training. We preach dry fire training, live fire training, shooting drills, etc. While all of these training methods are things you should work on, there is another area of training seldom discussed, mental training. Just like how your choice of firearm doesn't matter unless you have the right physical training, your physical training won't matter unless you have the proper mental training. To discuss in depth, we've asked lead instructor at Top Firearms Instruction and author of the book Fundamental Handgun Mastery, Tyson Kilbey, to be on the show. Welcome to the show, Tyson.
Thanks a lot, man. It's really my pleasure to be here, guys. I really appreciate it.
So besides what I just mentioned, how about, if it's cool, you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, yeah, you said it. I'm the owner of a company, a self-defense company called Top Firearms Instruction, and I've kind of had that company since 2012. But to rewind back, I'm a lieutenant for the sheriff's office here in Johnson County, Kansas. I've been there for 20 years, actually. Worked in various divisions. We have two rather large jails, so I worked in both of our jails for 5 years, was a training officer there, joined our SWAT team, was on patrol, field training officer on patrol, went to our full-time training unit, which was amazing because I basically got to shoot every day and do defensive tactics every day. So kind of immersed in all the things I love to do. Trained cops, all over the state for quite a while, and of course my agency. And I said, man, these skills, they're great for cops, but they're also really great for people that just want to learn self-defense, good law-abiding citizens. So that's why I kind of transcended to both the civilian training side and the law enforcement training side. And it's something I do every day. I do it every day, whether I'm teaching jiu-jitsu classes or firearms classes or writing or talking about this stuff. I'm kind of immersed in it. And, I really liked one thing. I've been on a lot of jiu-jitsu podcasts. It's been kind of a fun experience since I wrote the book, but I haven't done a lot of firearms podcasts. So when I saw you guys, I was like, okay, what is this? And I listened to your intro podcast and I was like, yep, I got to connect with these guys because this is perfect. What you guys like, hey, we want to talk about training, safety, the beginner, mindset, all that. And I'm like, this couldn't be a better place for me to talk and hang out. So that's why I'm here. That's a little about me. I get long-winded, so I hope that was a short version, believe me.
that works out pretty well, actually, on podcasts. The more talking you do, the more material we get. Yeah. So it's awesome. Yeah. I know the kind of the little background here is I started, I've been around firearms or, not really around them because my parents were never like really big firearm people when I was little, but I'd shoot with my brother and stuff like that and never really knew the ins and outs. It's always just kind of him saying like, here's a gun, it's ready to go, pull the trigger, and didn't know anything. And about a couple years ago, my wife and I just took like an intro to handgun class, and I kind of, it all flooded back to me, and like, I just kind of got into it. And so I wanted to start the podcast as, it's kind of a learning experience for me as I go too. So all the guests that I have on the show, like, that's my journey. I'm learning with, what they're saying. So I'm kind of learning with everybody that's listening to the podcast at the same time. So that's kind of like, there's so much information online, but a lot of it is like, you kind of need to know what you're talking about before you actually understand what they're saying online. So that's kind of what we wanted to do with this podcast, was just kind of, keep it pretty simple. So anybody who's just getting into firearms kind of knows what we're talking about, and it helps them out.
Well, that's great, Nick. And the thing is, one of the reasons that I'm a teacher, one of the reasons that I love teaching so much is I like to help people, but honestly, it's the selfish reason of I get better too. So what you say, hey, being on the podcast, I'm learning right along too. That's perfect. Not only is that normal, that's pretty brilliant. That's what you should do, in my opinion. And the other thing you said, I keyed in on the second thing, was keeping it simple. the more quote unquote advanced I get, I've been doing martial arts since I was 5. I've been shooting competitions for a long time doing that. The more quote unquote advanced I get, the more I appreciate the simple, you know what I mean? The basic fundamentals. So really you hit on two of the things that I don't care whether you're just getting into firearms because you're looking at the world today and you're thinking, man, maybe I need to learn about this, or you've been around guns your whole life. A lot of the concepts, they transcend together. Now, you may look at it from a different level of experience, but the basics and the fundamentals are the same for the first-time shooter as they are for the multi-level competition shooter who's been shooting for, years and years.
All right, so question 1. What are some of the more common mental mistakes people make when training or shooting firearms?
Yeah, good question. Mental mistakes. I think one of the things, and maybe it kind of goes with the territory of just how people in general who seek out new skills and want to learn, is I noticed a recurring theme that a lot of my students and just firearm students in general are kind of perfectionists. So if they don't get it right away, they tend to really get down on themselves. Oh, that last shot was bad. And I see that kind of snowball effect. And what happens there is, what should be fun and what should be an experience that, not only do you learn and have fun, it almost becomes stressful for them. So I think one of the most common things that I like to do with my students is let them relax and say, you're getting better. Not every shot initially is going to be perfect. We're going to dissect those skills. You're going to get better and better. But if you mess up or you don't get something right away, don't let it snowball. Know that we've all been there. Even some of the best shooters in the world have off days. So that's one of the mental mistakes I really see with people quite a bit, is just kind of getting down on themselves, and then they don't like it. They start to think that they're not good at it, and it just snowballs from there.
Yeah, that's pretty much me to a T. It's pretty bad. It takes a lot of perseverance to keep going once, to get yourself over that hump. And my daughter's the same way. Like, I'm trying to teach her how to shoot just a BB gun right now, and she misses and is like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's like, exactly. Well, I think you do. You didn't hit the target, so you're a little upset. But yeah, I can totally see that, because that's me. The first thing taught to new students, whether it's a class or first trip to the range, is the 4 basic rules of gun safety. We all know them. They're pretty easy to follow, but people are prone to make mistakes. So what are some training tips, maybe mentally and physically, that people can use to ensure that these rules become second nature?
Great question. This is okay. So in my book, Fundamental Handgun Mastery, there's no mistake that the first chapter is safety, and it's the 4 rules of firearm safety. And I guess what I've noticed, around different instructors and even different people that are very knowledgeable on firearm safety, is we tend to go over those 4 rules, and then, we'll get together at a range brief, before a shoot or something, say, okay, guys, remember the 4 rules, and we'll start naming them off, almost as if it's just a matter of routine. And I think what that kind of lends itself to is it kind of being complete. Like, we know it, but we're not really feeling the gravity of the situation. So when I go over initially the 4 rules of firearm safety, for example, we'll say treat all guns if they're loaded, one of the rules. I won't just leave it at that. I'll give examples of a parent who lost a child because they left a gun in the garage in their bag that they thought was unloaded, and now they'll never see their 3-year-old daughter again, And it's really solemn in the room, and people, no matter how much fun I have in my classes, when we have that safety portion, I give examples. The grandpa who left his revolver on the nightstand, and the 4-year-old grandson got it and shot and killed the 2-year-old grandson. So I'll give example after example, things I've heard, and it really kind of locks it down for people. And then what even gets more powerful than that is people will come up to me during the break and say, hey, my cousin or my neighbor or my father was injured in an accident, so that kind of makes it real. And, every break, if I'm, say, doing a 4-hour class or an 8-hour class, it won't just be a safety brief at the beginning. I'll constantly, if I feel kind of a break in the flow of the class, I'll just stop and say, hey, let's talk about the 4 rules of firearm safety again. So it's one of those things where for me, I don't do a safety brief at the beginning. I do a safety discussion. I provide examples, and then I bring it all the way through. And I say I really make it a group effort, so that by the end of the class, or somebody who's trained with me quite a bit, we're bouncing safety rules and scenarios off of each other the whole time. And I think that's one way that I've found that's been very productive in making safety, not just the brief at the beginning, but an entire part of your firearms training. So.
No, I like that technique, because, when I go to the range, if I take somebody new, I hear the same speech every time before we get out onto the range, and it gets to that point where it's almost like, you know, when you're on an airplane and they're giving you your safety briefing, and you're just like, well, I already got my headphones in and I'm reading something. I'm not listening to this because I know what to do. So, I like that, you know, keeping it real, giving examples, keeping everybody emotionally involved, and then they don't get bored and shut you out.
I'm telling you, it's powerful, man, because even when, you know, classes, you get to joking around, it's kind of a balancing act, because you don't want to joke around too much in a firearms class as if you're making light of the topic. But at the same time, you want it to be fun and a valuable experience. But I'm telling you, that really regrounds people back to it. So it's worked well for me and the people I train with. So
yeah. Which just kind of digressing here a little bit, just out of curiosity, which one of the 4 rules do you see get broken the most? Because I know which one I've seen get broken the most.
Good question. Good. Now, for beginner and intermediate shooters, when you're actually teaching the manipulation of the handgun, for me, it's keep your finger off the trigger till you're on target, ready to fire. Mm-hmm. Because I've found so much. I mean, as humans, we grip things. It's you know, to have that position with the finger straight and above the trigger guard in that safe position until you're on target, ready to fire, is not something that we're born with or intuitive in gripping and grabbing. So that's the first thing that I hit on beginner and intermediate shooters. You know, the muzzle discipline, though, for an intermediate shooter or a beginner shooter, that's up there too. But I would put it right at finger trigger discipline. What do you think?
Yeah, I see my biggest experience was my CCW class when our instructor had to literally bring in another person to watch one specific person, because, you know, It was a class of 10 people, and he's like, normally I can handle 10 people, but I'm just going to have to handle you 9 and bring somebody in, another employee, to watch this one person, because that gun was just pointing everywhere and the finger was on the trigger, and like,
so it was a duel. It was a double.
Yeah, and I joke about it now, but I mean, you know, in all seriously, like, you know, we team up in groups of 5, and I'm like, I'm going to make sure there's a couple people between me and her on the line, just because, you know, I don't want anybody to get shot, but I definitely don't want to be the guy getting shot. That's for sure.
No doubt. And you know what I think it is in terms of the muzzle discipline? What I've found is, for the most part, when people are actually in the act of shooting, they do a pretty good job while they're shooting of keeping the gun downrange in a safe direction. But then it's almost like their mind shuts off. Their gun safety part of their mind just shuts off when they're not actually shooting. And they're looking around, they're asking the instructor, and they're just pointing the gun anywhere. You know, and those 4 rules aren't just for the act of shooting. Those 4 rules of safety are all time, you know, whether you're shooting, eating, cleaning your gun. And I think that's the disconnect that a lot of people have, at least that I've found, is while they're shooting, they're okay, but they feel like they're not shooting anymore, but they don't realize that they have a potentially lethal tool right in their hands.
Right. Yeah. You still got to follow them. My biggest thing is, like, I feel like when the order that they get put in isn't necessarily like the order of importance. They're all important in their own way, and it's like they just happen to get put in that order because they needed to put them in order when they're coming out with a list.
Yes.
And then we've had this discussion, I can't remember what episode it was, but it was just like, you know, if somebody follows just 2 of these 100% of the time, that like reduces the chance of an accidental shooting by almost 100%. It's like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's funny. We do tend to say them in that order, but they're called the 4 rules of firearm safety. They're not considered the top 4, 4th place to 3rd place. You're absolutely right on.
There's a lot that goes into accurate shooting, both physically and mentally. Being scared or trying to anticipate the shot is probably the biggest one I see when I'm with a new shooter. What tips do you have for people to help them mentally overcome this issue?
Yeah, I'll give a couple. I mean, there's obviously a lot of things, and everyone's kind of unique in their style or shooting or what they're exactly doing. But you're right, anticipating and kind of I guess fearing that recoil and feedback. So there's 2 things. I would say, number 1, you just need some range time. There's no way around getting some range time behind that gun and feeling, you know, the cycle of operation of the gun, and realizing that, hey, when that trigger is pressed and that shot breaks, the gun's not going to come up and beat me up. You know, the gun's not going to fly back at me. So it's nothing to fear. You'll have with a good shooting platform, you'll have the ability to control the recoil. So that's 1. And 2, well, no, I'll give you a couple. 2, and you talked about it earlier, you said dry firing is really important. Dry firing is definitely a way to help diagnose that. You can see when they press the trigger. Now they're not getting the recoil, obviously, when you dry fire, but you can see that muzzle dip, that very pronounced muzzle dip. A lot of people with dry fire. So that's one way to look at it and see maybe how pronounced it is. And then from there's kind of some other strategies you can use. I always tell students to get snap caps or dummy rounds, throw them in with your loaded magazine and add that into, with your live fire. So you don't even know where it comes off, and you can really see that muzzle dip and that anticipation when you do that. And what I've been doing lately, and I say lately, I mean the past few years, is everybody's got a cell phone now. I actually record when I know I put dummy rounds in. I'll record them and I'll let them see just how pronounced that is, because sometimes they're so focused on sight picture, sight alignment, their trigger press, they don't realize how much of an anticipation they really have. But if you pull out the cell phone and they're shooting 5 rounds, one of them's a dummy round, and you show them that, a lot of times they're like, wow, that really is pronounced. So those are a few of the strategies. But yeah, probably one of the most common, initial shooter problems of all time, what you said right there.
Yeah, so whenever I'm working with somebody, and I'll just say by just warning or whatever, I'm not a certified trainer or anything. I just have friends or family that come out and shoot with me, but I'll see them like dip down and they're wondering, it's like, why am I shooting the ground? And it's like, well, you're anticipating the gun coming up, so you're aiming down, you're pushing forward, the gun's going down. And even if you don't think that it's pointing down that much, I don't think they understand like the degree, just like moving the gun down 2 degrees, it's going to make the bullet go 5 feet lower than you think it's going to go.
Especially when you're not, it's all good when you're shooting 9 feet away, 10 feet away, but you put type of distance on a shot, 15 yards, that becomes exponential really quick.
Right. Yep.
Yep. Very true.
Obviously, different mindsets that people should have when using firearms in different situations. Can you explain what the proper mindset should be when, I'll list them all here first and then we can kind of go back, but firing at the range, firing in a competition, or firing in a self-defense situation. So what would be the mindset when you're just firing at the range?
Okay, good question. And some of these are going to have an element of all three. The first and foremost, and this is obviously going to be all three, is safety. If your safety's not there, then none of those three elements are any good. So at the range, safety. And then at the range, this gets to be a little bit more personalized. Is this an outdoor range, an indoor range? Are you shooting steel? Are you shooting paper? Kind of what the context of the range is. But at the range, you have a lot more freedom. That's where if you're safe, you have fun, and you can kind of direct your training for the day. I'll shoot in outdoor ranges and indoor ranges, and maybe I'm getting ready for a competition. So my range drills are prepped for competition. Or maybe I'm at the range and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to practice with my concealed carry weapon today. Or maybe I'm at the range, I want to do something totally different. I'm getting ready for a tactical class. So now I'm going to do moving and shooting. I'm going to work around cover and stuff like that. So it's obviously you have a lot more when it's your range day, you have a lot more options. You can kind of focus it how you want as long as you're safe.
Okay, good. So, what about when you're in competition then?
Okay, so competition, that's obviously fun. And I would say as long as you're just not totally against it, whether you're a new firearms enthusiast or someone who's been around a while, everybody should do one or two of these. And there are so many options when it comes to competition. I mean, you've got USPSA, you got Steel Challenge, you got Glock shoots, the list goes on, 3-gun, list goes on and on. But competing is cool because you have kind of a goal that you're working for, and you kind of have something to measure your results. So it kind of can, some of the boredom that can come from just going to the range and just plinking all the time, that can kind of reignite you. Mm-hmm. So with a competition, you're going to have to deal with nerves. You're going to have to deal with accuracy under pressure and time constraints and all that stuff. So it really kind of pushes you and challenges you. So my advice is go out and do it. Try your best. Don't expect to be the high gun or the first place winner the first time you do a competition, right? Because man, it's a whole nother animal. I mean, you're talking about understanding the stages, it's a game. You're really manipulating every phase of the game, and you're shaving off time in areas that you never even thought about, from the number of steps you take from one shooting box to another, to the type and time that you do a reload, if that's part of the competition, to dealing with nerves. So you can get really, the competition aspect, no matter how, how serious you want to take it, but you can really get into all the finer details of it, and it can be something that really is a big part of your training. So that's some of what I'm about.
Yeah, sidetracking, like let's say, I've never done a competition. I've looked into it, and like you said, there's even locally here at the one range locally here that does competitions. I mean, there's like 40 different things to choose. So
yeah.
What would you recommend if, just a pistol one? If I wanted to take my pistol, what competition would be the good starting point?
Okay, well, one that I like and one that I started out with is a lot of ranges indoor out do what's called an action pistol shoot, and they're very user friendly. Usually the people are very helpful to new shooters, but it would be something like 3 stages, maybe a paper target course, maybe one that has a steel plate rack and some steel targets, and then maybe some bowling pins or something like that. Real minimal movement, very good for beginner shooters. It's not USPSA or IPSC where you're going for classifications or anything like that. You're competing against usually anywhere from 20 to 40 people, varying skill levels that are just happy you're out there being part of the competition, having fun. So for a beginner shooter, find an action pistol or something like that. That's awesome. If you're specific to Glock, which I know people shoot all sorts of things, the indoor GSSF shoots are awesome. I mean, they're pretty easy. They're fun. You get a chance to win random Glocks through the drawing. So that's another one that I would do. And then obviously there's other ones. But those are 2 I'd recommend, handgun wise, pistol wise, for a beginner shooter.
Yeah, and like I've listened to a bunch of stories about people who are into shooting competitions, and like one of the things that probably I think turns people off is just the cost. But I don't think they realize that the people who are being interviewed, because they're competitive shooters, are like, to lack of a better way of saying, they're in the big leagues. Like they're spending a crap ton of money, and they've got their fancy gun, and they're spending a ton of money on ammo, constantly training and doing all those things. And I think if you're brand new and you're doing one of those courses like you just mentioned, you're not gonna have to worry too much about that. So don't let that be something that holds you back from getting into it.
Well, while you bring that, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that that's a theme that a lot of people have talked about over the years is, man, I like shooting, but there's no way I can afford this hobby because it's just way too expensive. And I agree, it can be. And like you said, the high level competition shooters with sponsors that shoot thousands upon thousands of rounds a year, that gets expensive. But one thing that I talk to a lot of my students and even training partners about is ways to improve and do it in a cost efficient way. So if you don't mind, I just want to throw a couple of those things out now, because I don't think people realize how cost efficient you could be. You hit it, and I'm telling you, dry fire. Dry fire costs nothing but your time. Now, time is valuable, don't get me wrong, but I'm not talking about an hour or 2 hours a day of dry fire. 10 or 15 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week of dry fire will take somebody who's probably considered a beginner shooter. And I'm telling you, after 6 months, they would be an intermediate or decent level shooter just from the dry fire. One thing I do in my apartment, I have an airsoft set up. So not only do I dry fire just about every day, getting ready for competition probably a couple times a day, but I shoot airsoft in my apartment. So you're still working on the fundamentals of marksmanship, and it's costing nothing but your time. And then obviously if you want to buy ammo in bulk, reloads and stuff like that, you can find ways to make it more cost efficient. So there's definitely strategies you can use to make, let's face it, most hobbies nowadays, if you want to get good at them, cost a little bit of a financial investment. And there's ways to do this, get really good without breaking the bank, in my opinion.
No, yeah, I totally agree. It's just knowing where to look, and even when you get to the time buying ammo, there's just so many places that sell ammo now, and kind of going back to what I said earlier, like I'm not going to buy the most expensive ammo my first competition that I go to. Like I don't buy the most expensive ammo when I'm just going to the range and shooting at targets. Like I'm not trying to use my pistol to hit something 200 yards away. So I'm not, I don't need to do that, but so the last one, what mindset when it comes to self-defense, I guess, like what mindset should people be in? Not necessarily when the need for self-defense happens. Maybe this is just your general everyday. I'm carrying my firearm. I'm not at the range. I'm not in a competition. What should maybe your mindset be just in general? And then maybe once you do have to draw your weapon, what should your mindset be?
Yeah, great great question. Obviously, man, that's something that we could spend a lot of time on. So I'll try and get a good summary that will let people take away something for it. Well, no, and we hear this word thrown around a lot is awareness. But definitely awareness is number one. And what I mean by awareness is you're aware that you have your gun, you're aware of the training and the capabilities that you have, and you're aware of your surroundings. And to kind of unpack that a little bit more, what you're looking for, generally speaking, in the self-defense situation is time, distance, and cover, in my opinion. Those are the things that I look for when I have a firearm. And the reason I'm looking for those things is even though I have a firearm, my goal at the end of the day is never to have to use it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I have time to make a good decision, to plan an escape route if I need to, distance and for the same reason, or cover, then I may not have to use it. So those are some of the mindset things that I think about. The other thing that I really talk about a lot when it comes to self-defense and relating it back to competition is I think too many people completely separate self-defense and competition. Now there's no doubt that there are certain skills that apply only to competition, and there's certain skills that only apply to self-defense. But there is a lot more commonality that I don't think people realize. Like, what's a goal in a shooting competition? Well, to shoot accurately with speed under pressure. What would be your goal if you're in a gunfight? Accurately, under time constraints, under a lot of pressure. So I think if you can find ways to merge the two, you're really going to be doing a lot for yourself in your training. You know, like I said, this is something we could talk about a lot. It's a very important part because I think most people train at least for some element of self-defense, protecting their family, protecting themselves, especially in today's world. So anytime you can merge the concepts of competition and self-defense, I think it's a double win-win because it's like you're training for both. One little tip, I'll give one little tip on self-defense in terms of firearms training, because I actually figured this out. I didn't even figure it out. It was kind of brought to my attention way later in the game than it should have been. So I'll kind of tell myself here. But when I used to go to the range, I'm talking for years, and this was at this point, I've been competing for a while and teaching for a while, I would almost always go to the range and do a warm-up drill. You know, nice slow shooting, no time constraints. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of dot torture. If you Google it, that's one of the familiar concepts that come up. And so I would do these slow drills. I'd warm up, and then I'd go into whatever my skill of the day was, self-defense, training for steel challenge, whatever it was. But I started training with an FBI agent who's a phenomenal shooter. He actually won Steel Challenge Nationals years ago. And he told me, he's like, hey, what do you carry concealed and where? And we started talking about that. He's like, you ever just at the very beginning of your session, completely cold, do drills from your concealed carry configuration holster and start to go speed and accuracy right from the beginning? I'm like, you know what? I don't think I've ever done that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You should probably, go from 0 to 60 because that's what's going to be in real life. Yeah.
Well, I felt like an idiot. So I was like, wow. So now every once in a while, and at the range, I'm like, hey, today I'm training for self-defense. So it's constantly a learning curve. It really is. But awareness, knowing what your goals are, merging the concepts of self-defense and competition, all that is going to make you more confident. And I believe the more confident and more prepared you are, it's like an inverse relationship. The less likely you are going to have to use it. And I think for most of us, most of my students and most gun owners in general, is we don't get a gun so that we can because we like the idea of having to shoot someone. You know, completely opposite. We get a gun because we know that we would rather carry a gun every day for the rest of our lives and, not have to use it than ever be in a situation where one time we could have saved ourselves, somebody in our family, an innocent person, but we didn't have it. It's just like a seatbelt, when you're driving a car. You don't want to use that seatbelt. It's just like a fire extinguisher. I don't want to have to use it, but I certainly don't want to be in a situation where I could. So I know I kind of jumped around a little bit there, but those are the key concepts that I personally think about and talk to a lot of my students about when it comes to self-defense and training and mindset.
No, I like that. Feel like if the situation arose and I needed to draw my firearm and take the shot, in my head, I feel like I've trained enough. I've mentally prepared myself enough to be able to do that. I understand it's a them versus me or them versus my family type scenario. But at the end of the day, if someone hasn't been put into that situation, they honestly won't know what they're going or they don't know what they're going to do.
You're right.
They might
100%.
Freeze up completely.
You're absolutely right. In fact, the likelihood is very good for that. That panic paralysis is something that's been shown against the, amongst the best of us, because you're going through a major physiological response. If that happens, it would probably be the most stressful thing we ever had to deal with in our life. And there, like you said, you can only prepare yourself to the best of your ability. And there's more you can do, paintball, simunitions. You can do it as much as you want, but to be in that situation, you don't know for 100% sure. All you can do is prepare. You're dead on accurate.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that gives me the most hope is like I'll get into, I've been driving for a long time, so I've been in car crashes, I'll admit. But, I've been in the situation where I have to do something crazy to avoid getting in that crash or to stay safe, and I at least keep my calm in that situation. And then when it's over, like when the car stopped, that's like when my blood pressure starts going up. So I'm like, I hope that means that if I was ever in the situation, I'd think clear. But like you said, it's just, you don't know. Like,
you don't, but I'm telling you what, I think that's a much more accurate gauge than you're giving yourself credit for. Because think about it, that's a potentially life and death situation, a car crash. And I tell this to my students all the time, defensive driving is completely connected to defensive tactics or defensive firearms, because you are in that same fear response of, man, if I don't act under pressure here, this could be a life-changing tragedy. So I think it's a lot more accurate than you think. Only the difference with that a lot of times is generally the person in the car is not trying to crash into you.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not an intentional act from somebody else, but it's just as scary nonetheless. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So knowing that you have no way of knowing how you're going to act in that situation, would the best possible way just be training and training and training to that, whatever action you needed to take becomes second nature? Like you're not even thinking about it. It just happens and you go.
Well, I would say not only is that the best possible way, that's the only way is to get your confidence to a level of being able to do it without thinking about it. Because if any skill, I don't care what skill it is, if you have to consciously think about how to do it properly under immense stress, it's virtually impossible to perform that skill. It has to be something that you do, you do to a point of unconscious competence. And firearms is no different. So yeah, that's the level you want to attain. It's got to be something that you can do, without thinking about it. Because you can't say, wait, time out, bad guy, hold on. Wait, in class oh yeah, it's this reload. No, you don't have time for that.
Right.
It's got to be good.
Yeah, I've got some stories about stuff like that, but yeah, that's funny. Kind of piggybacking on what we just talked about, there's definitely a stereotype that non-firearm users have against firearm users, and that's kind of the we just want to be a hero. We're not, we talked about like there's a possibility you could freeze when you draw your gun.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of non-firearm people or anti-firearm people think we just want a gun because we want to be that superhero that swoops in and saves the day. What else should we be doing just to kind of prevent that? Because, honestly, I don't think I'd mind if I ended up being the hero in that situation. I probably wouldn't want to be on the news or anything like that. Like, I'd want to get out of there as quick as possible, but, I'm not going to lie. Like, I'd feel great that I saved someone's life. But that's not my ultimate goal. So what do you think beyond what we've talked about? Is there anything else that you can do that people can use to not be that person?
Yeah, well, to not be it or for the perception, because there's kind of two questions in there and both of them are relevant. Because you're absolutely right. That is a perception. I mean, non-gun, not all of them. Some of them just truly don't know. They were just raised. Their parents did not allow them to be around guns, so they know nothing about it. And it's a matter of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but just ignorance. They don't know anything about guns. But on the other hand, there are people that are, vehemently against guns, and any negative stereotype that they can, or connotation they can put on a gun owner, they'll do it. And I don't think there's a lot of them, but they can be loud. And so my response to that is, number one, don't on our side of this thing as gun owners, responsible gun owners, don't live up to that. Don't be that person. And I think we need to call out somebody. We've all seen them. I mean, I've seen the gun guys that have the tack vest and the this and the that. You can just tell that they wanted to be a cop but they couldn't, or this and that. And it's like, man, I don't want to be associated with you because I could tell that mindset. So number one, we have to maybe call those guys out as well, and definitely not infringe upon their rights, but maybe educate them. My answer always comes, I'm a trainer, I'm a teacher. My answer always comes back to training. And in any of my classes, I talk to these guys about the after effects of a shooting or a chaotic situation. 20 years in law enforcement, I was a use of force reviewer for my agency, so I would do interviews with people after use of force. It is not, it's not fun times. I mean, there's legal issues that come on, there's mental issues, there's a whole gamut of emotions. And you're right, none of us, I think, would feel bad, but if we had to save a life, but a lot of people, I mean, when you see the interviews with people that have done heroic things, most of the time they're just some of the most humble people. They're like, no, I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would have done in my situation. So I think if we focus on the good and we train and we call out the people that are, clearly doing it for show and to get people riled up, I think we're doing the right thing. And I think most gun owners are like that. I mean, not all gun owners are do the right thing or are very, what should I say, tactful in the way they speak, but I think those of us who need to really be out there and willing to educate and have the debates that we do. And ultimately, I mean, I know I'm biased, but when that happens, we usually win. We usually win the conversation and we bring people over to our side because, most of us are just good people who don't want to see anybody injured, killed, or hurt. But to that end, we don't want to allow someone to kill or hurt innocent people. So that's my thoughts, just kind of off the cuff here, thinking about that question, but it's relevant, sure.
I like that. We talked about this a little bit, but stagnation seems to be a problem that just grows and grows more and more in today's age with technology and phones, and everybody gets bored. But specifically how it relates to firearms, like you were saying, you go to the range over and over and over again, and you just kind of get bored. We don't want people to get bored. We want people to stay interested in firearms because we need as many people interested in firearms as possible. What mental tips besides, going to a competition like we already talked about?
No, you got it.
What other tips would there be that you could give people to avoid that kind of stagnation?
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, stagnation is a problem in any hobby. Think about it, people who work out. How often do you hear, but I get tired of running, I get bored with running, or I get bored with weights, or, self-defense, whatever hobby it is, stagnation is possible. So with firearms, here's some of the tips and tricks that I would give. Number one, for a long time, I did a training log where I would kind of log my progress on everything. So that almost motivated me because I would be like, oh, I shot this many rounds this month, or I had this many, shots in a 10 circle from 25 yards this time, and I want to improve that. So kind of writing things down or putting it in your cell phone and giving yourself kind of goals to reach is a good way to do it. You're really limited only by your creativity in terms of the types of drills you do. I'll just throw out a couple of the ones you take a deck of playing cards, and have playing cards as your target, and then have another deck, if you're in an indoor range at your bay or outdoor range on a table or whatever, and you can do a drill like flip the cards, identify the cards, and get your target. I mean, get steel, do different stuff. So there's a lot of different, you're really only, as long as you're safe, you're only limited by your own creativity. So coming up with those range drills, competitions, training logs, shoot paintball, all sorts of stuff that kind of gets you into the mindset of doing this. And you could do something different all year long, different every week. So those are some of the things that I think about in terms of mixing it up.
Yeah, I definitely like the writing stuff down because I see when I'm making progress, or you're making progress gradually in your life with whatever hobby we're talking about. So when you do it gradually, it's one of those things you never notice it. But if you're keeping that log down, you can kind of go back to the beginning every once in a while and just be like, wow, look how shitty I was. And I really have improved. I didn't notice it, but I have. So I like that.
Yep, that's right.
So this one will be kind of a fun one because we all say, we're talking a lot about training and mental training, physical training, and it's not about the gun. It's about training, but there probably are some things that you can do, or a certain type of gun or certain accessories that actually do help a person.
No doubt.
So
no doubt.
What would some of those be?
Okay, well, again, and I know you said it, so I'm going to sound like a broken record, but training first. You cannot buy good shooting. It's just so hard to do. So training first. But that being said, I'm really not a gear guy, but I'll tell you what, sights, obviously getting a good sight picture, acquiring it quickly is a good part of accurate shooting. So, and the thing is that just related to our vision. And a lot of us, whether you're an older shooter and you have bifocals, or whether you just tend to pick up red better than green, thin sight better than a thicker sight, so sights is definitely something, that is a very simple modification that I think is important that people can do and use. So obviously finding a color of sight or a type of sight. I like very thin front sights. I like black sights. I don't like the red, the green, stuff like that. That's just a personal. I have many good shooters that I shoot with that really like red front sights or whatever. So I'd say sights are a good modification. When you're talking about competing and really getting follow-up shots and stuff like that, at some point you do want to look at the amount of pull or pressure it takes to put pressure trigger, whether it's an 8-pound trigger or a 3-pound trigger. That does make a difference on multiple shots or even firing that first shot. So trigger modifications are not in and of itself something I'm against. So trigger and sight modifications for sure, something that should be looked into again, but that's at a point more at an intermediate level. I think initially a factory gun with your training, build and go into those. People always ask me about lasers, so I should mention it. They're not inherently wrong. There's good and bad with every tool or modification. They're not my style. I don't like lasers too much for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like people tend to almost get over reliant on them, and then if it breaks or doesn't work, then what? And then sometimes if you have a red laser and then I got a red target, then what?
Right.
So there's that might come up with that. So again, not wrong. Just everything has a plus and minus. I could go on and on, but those are just some of the ones I think off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. What type of advancements do you see in the future of firearm training, both physically and mentally?
Well, certainly ammo I've noticed the quality of ammo improving over the last 15 to 20 years. So that's fantastic. That number one is good. Virtual simulators, simulator type of shooting where you can actually feel the recoil of the gun and do shooting inside. I think that's going to be a big part of shooting in the next 10 years, not only because of its cost saving abilities, but it's just easy access to train all the time. So if you, I don't know, have you had a chance yet to do like a 360 simulator or virtual simulator shooting at like a Gander Mountain or any of those places?
I haven't, but the range that I go to here in Omaha that I'm a member of, they're doing a little remodel right now. So I think one of the things they're supposed to have is a virtual environment, and I'm not 100% sure what that's going to entail, but I'm assuming it's a lot of like situational based training. Like you're going to have a choice between shooting at a bad guy or a good person, things like that. I don't know, but that was just my assumption.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would think it would definitely be worth at least checking out, because I think that's going to be a lot bigger in the future. Yeah, those are two of the main ones. And between quality of ammo, quality of guns in general, hopefully the quality of training, which I think, it's the internet age. We have podcasts now, we have books, we have videos, we have all that. So I think you said at the beginning, it's hard to determine what's garbage and what's good. But at the same time, the information is out there. And I think the good information is going to have a tendency to rise to the top, because we don't always get it right initially, but we have a tendency to figure it out. So between training, ammo, the guns themselves, and virtual reality training, I think I'm excited about what the future of firearms training holds.
Yeah, us too. Can't wait. Well, just wrapping it up here a little bit, I guess. Thanks again for taking the time to be on the show. I think we covered a lot of valuable information here. How can people reach you, or how do you want people to get in contact with you?
They can reach me any way they want. My website is www.topfirearmsinstruction.com. I post my bio, my instructor's bios, classes coming up, descriptions, and all my contact info. I have a Facebook page, Top Firearms Instruction, as well. I'm on most of your major social media as much as possible, and I love connecting with anybody who's like-minded, likes firearms, self-defense. I'm here in Kansas, but I travel, and like I said, I'm on the internet a lot, looking around, and I would love to talk to any of your listeners and anyone out there. And you guys, thank you guys so much. I really, like I said, when I found you guys' podcast and saw that intro, I was like, oh, this is a good one. I hope these guys let me come and talk to them. So I'm here. Thanks again, guys, man.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you later.
See ya. Later.
Thank you for listening to Trigger Discipline. Follow us on Twitter Instagram, and Facebook. Links are in the description.
You can view our website at triggerdiscipline.info or contact us with any suggestions or questions you have at contact@triggerdiscipline.info.